here's the plan for today. Just a couple of words about the last class we had, which was the Haftarah of Bechukotai, and yeah, I like that class too. And then we'll start the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah, second day of Rosh Hashanah, very beautiful, from the section of Consolation, Prophecies of Yirmiyahu. Then, if you don't mind, I'd like to say a few words about the Megillah at the end. To raise one question about the Megillah for a few minutes. That's the plan for today. I'm not sure we'll finish the Haftarah of, but let's start now with that. Let's just finish what we started last time, which was 2 weeks ago. So we started last time, almost finished the Haftarah of Bechukotai, which begins in chapter 16 of Yirmiyahu, and it ends in 17. We spent a fair amount of time on that. I don't want to go over that. I noticed one thing at the end of the Haftarah. This is found in chapter 17. It really begins, let's say, in verse 9. But I just want to say one thing about the end of the Haftarah. And that is, beginning in verse number 9 and 10, the heart is devious, perverse. Who can fathom it? Who knows, actually? God says, prophet speaks in God's name. Who actually knows the other person, what they're thinking? Sometimes I wonder if we know ourselves what we're thinking, but who understands this? Who can know? Ani Hashem chokerei v'ochen koyot, v'latedu ish kidrachav kifri ma'alav. It says, God, I know what the intentions and the aspirations of every person, so I can then fairly respond to what they do, knowing what their intention was. And it continues, Karei dagar v'lo yalad, oshev lo b'mishpat, so continues by saying that, like a partridge, the certain birds that sit on eggs that are not hers. So is the person who amasses wealth through someone else's efforts. And that won't, in the long term, that doesn't work, says the Navi. That's in verse number 11. At the end of the continuation, which is the end of the Haftarah, is the following. Kisei kavod marom merishon makom mikdoshenu. So now the prophecy refers to God as the throne of God, marom merishon, high or exalted from old times, makom mikdoshenu, the place of our temple, of our holy place. It's actually parallel in a way to the way the Haftarah began. The Haftarah begins in chapter 16, towards the end of chapter 16. Hashem, it's verse number 19. Hashem uzi uzi umnusi biyom tzara. So the Haftarah begins by Yirmiyahu calling out to God and referring to God as his strength, his fortress and his strength, and his refuge in a time of distress. So that's how the Haftarah begins, with a calling to God, described in a certain way, as a God who is strong, who is secure, and who is a deliverer in times of trouble. And the Haftarah actually ends, one might say, in a parallel kind of construction, where again the prophet calls out to God, this time referring to God as the exalted one from the beginning, Marom Rishon, Makom Mikdoshenu, the place of our holy site. And the next pasuk is actually very interesting. Mikveh Yisrael Hashem, Kol Ozvecho Yevoshu, V'surai ba'aretz yikatevu, Ki azvu mekor mayim chayim et Hashem. So Mikveh Yisrael Hashem, Mikveh, Kavel Hashem, our hope. God is Israel's hope. All those who forsake God will be put to shame. V'surai, those who forsake God. Then we have a difficult expression, ba'aretz yikatevu. So we don't know what the Aretz Yikatevu means. So the translator here takes it as will be written down for punishment, or will be doomed. That's the translation in the JPS, if possible. It's interesting that Yikatevu here means like a gzar din, like a punishment. But as we've seen many times, the writing in this book is Yirmiyahu is basically a writer. He's told to write things down, including, as we'll see, the prophecies of consolation. There's a separate directive in the book to write down prophecies of consolation that we'll get to in a few minutes, hopefully. And anyway, Kiyazvu, the ones who depart from God, will have a bad end, will be doomed, will be written down in terms of having a bad response. Ki azvu, because they have abandoned Mikar Mayim Chayim et Hashem, the source of the Mikar Mayim Chayim, the source of the living waters, namely Hashem. So it's actually interesting here that I think there's actually a play on words over here, which is the word Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. Mikveh means a hope. Kavod means to hope. Kaveh Hashem Chazak v'yametz libecha v'kaveh Hashem. We have in the 27th Psalm. But mikveh also means a gathering. The first time the word mikveh appears in the Torah, well, today we call it mikveh, basically. But the first time you have it in the Chumash, Yikavu hamayim, and God commands the waters to gather together. Yikavu hamayim el makom achad b'terei hayabasha. The Torah speaks in Parsha in Vayikra, mikveh mayim yiyeh tahar. A collection of waters, right, shall be pure. In the Chumash, it sounds like the waters themselves are pure. The rabbinic understanding is that the waters purify. But elsewhere, we have mayim chayim as a purification. So the waters are often waters of purification. And over here, Mikveh Yisrael Hashem, which means God is our hope. But Mikveh Yisrael could also mean God is our waters. God is our purifying water. Right? You have it in the Mishnah, actually, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva. Ashreichem Yisrael. Right? Ma mikveh mitaret et hatmeim, afa kodesh baruch hu mitaret Yisrael. Right?
The Silber recites that.
Yeah, they sing it sometimes. Also, they chant it or sing it. Rabbi Akiva. I'm never seen it. As a kid, I grew up with that. So Rabbi Ashreichem Yisrael. So the Chevra Kadisha makes sense, actually. There were Tara and whatever. So Rabbi Akiva said how fortunate we are, because it says Mikveh Yisrael Hashem, that God is our mikveh, our hope, but he takes it, the drush is God is our waters, purifying waters, the same way that the waters purify, that when it was impure, so does God purify Israel. And the truth of the matter is that there's something to that in the pasuk.
There's reference to waters earlier.
Yes, I'll get to that. Right, that's correct. The reference to waters earlier, I'll get to that in a minute. There's also a reference to water at the end of the verse. The verse itself, right? But those who abandon God will be disgraced or punished. Because they have abandoned God, namely B'char Mayim Chayim, the source of the living waters, the source of life. So you see in the very verse itself, which begins with Mikveh Yisrael and ends with Azvu B'char Mayim Chayim et Hashem, that the verse itself, that the drasha actually has something to it in terms of the verse. It could actually be a secondary significance of the verse. What do you want to say, though? Right.
I always look at that's why people do baptism.
Why baptism? I don't know this. Yeah. Could be. I don't really know the. Right. Right. I mean, we have it in that tradition. The one who comes to convert to Judaism goes to the mikveh. I mean, the mikveh is not just to purify from impurity. The mikveh, that's nothing to do with impurity. The mikveh has more than one function. One is an pure and impure, ritually pure and impure. But there's a secondary, it may be related actually, but it's certainly somewhat different, which is a change of status. And someone is a non-Jew, chooses to be a Jew. So the main thing you have to do is the main ritual at any event is to go to the mikveh. Right. For a man, he has to be circumcised also, but that's not clear whether the circumcision is part of the ritual of conversion, whether the circumcision is a prerequisite to conversion. That's a big, you're in Gemara, that's a Hakira in the Gemara. You're in Gemara. Why does a man require milah? Is it because without milah, the circumcision, the conversion doesn't take place? Or is the circumcision itself part of the ritual? And they're important distinctions. Because if it's not part of the ritual, you don't need a lot of people to be around there. Just do it in one person. But if it's part of the ritual, you're caught to know what's happening, etc. So that's the question. But in any event, the main ritual for conversion is mikvah. It's going to the mikvah. That's not to remove impurity. Actually, that's a sort of change of status. Kedushat Yisrael, they call it. That's not about them. In any event, there are other verses though in Yirmiyahu that refer to God as a source of life. And you have that in the beginning of Yirmiyahu, actually. I don't know, maybe Zohar has a different pasuk. But the pasuk I was thinking of, at the beginning of Yirmiyahu, let's find that verse. Towards the very beginning. It's one of the Haftorahs that we read before Tisha B'Av. Let's see. Here it is. It's chapter 2. In chapter 2, verse number 13. Kishtayim ra'ot asami. So the second chapter of Yirmiyahu, which is the second of the three readings before Tisha B'Av. We study the chapter you read on Tisha B'Av, Sof HaSifeim, but this is the one you read before, 2 weeks before Tisha B'Av, chapter 2, verse 13. Kishtayim ra'ot asami. So Yirmiyahu, God complains, the people have done two evils. Oti azvu mekor mayim chayim. It's also a haftarah, this one. It's the second. They have abandoned me, says God, mekor mayim chayim, the source of living waters. Right? V'achsov lahem borot ishbarim. And they left me to hew out for themselves cisterns, borot, asher lo yachilu hamayim, that can't contain the water. So there you see that the water is once again used by Yirmiyahu in the sense of God is the source of living water, the source of life. And the complaint is they abandoned me, which is bad enough, but they dig other wells which can't contain the water. So they leave me, it's not they left me for something better or something in the same range. I mean, nothing's in the same range, but the point is they left me for nothing. They left me for wells that can't contain the water. But you see already in chapter 2 of Yirmiyahu, beginning of the book, that he's already using this idea of water, as God is represented by the water. And now we have in our verse, Mikveh Yisrael Hashem, that God is Israel's hope, but there's a secondary, perhaps even I think it's in the verse itself, the secondary meaning of the verse, that God is the source of life, which is the mikveh, which is the water. And those who abandon God have abandoned Mekor Mayim Chayim et Hashem. That's the next to last verse of the Haftorah. It's always interesting to see how the Haftorah is arranged, because it's often broken up and ends in the middle of a story sometimes. And the last verse of the Haftorah is a verse that we probably somewhat familiar with, because one of our prayers of Amidah is actually based on this verse, namely, Rifa'eni Hashem ve'erafei, Hoshieni ve'ivasheya. Heal me, God, and I will be healed. Save me, and I will be saved. Ki tiwati ata, you are my glory. Okay? And again, it goes back to the beginning of the Haftorah in chapter 16. Hashem uzi u'mozi u'nusi b'yom tzara. And here in this end, we have a reference to God. It says tiwati ata. It's actually something very interesting to think about in general when you read this verse. We are familiar with the Amidah. One of the blessings of the Amidah, one of the requests that we have in our prayers is a request for health, for healing. It's in the plural. Our prayers are written in the plural. Rifa'enu Hashem ve'erafei, Hoshienu ve'ivasheya, right? Ki tu'atenu ata. So the blessing in the Shemona Esrei is exactly this verse, the beginning of this verse, but in the plural. But I thought something actually is very interesting, two things interesting about the blessing of Rifa'enu. Rifa'enu is a blessing, we're asking for health, right? Halei refuah shalema l'chamakotenu, Rofei neman v'rachmanata, you are a healer. Rofei chalei amo Yisrael, God is healing the sick of Israel. So it's a blessing for health, to prevent illness, to heal us if we are sick, etc. But the verse itself, actually, and I think even in the Shemona Esrei, carries with it a second significance. I'm talking about the pshat of it, actually, that it's not just healing from someone who's actually physically ill. Because the verse is, Rifa'enu Hashem ve'erafei, heal me and I will be healed, save me and I will be saved. I will be delivered. So it sounds like from the verse itself that when we talk about healing, it's not just the physical healing of sickness, but the verse itself suggests that actually it's more than that. It's physical, but it's also emotional, spiritual, etc. That kind of healing is implied in the verse, and therefore actually implied in the blessing as well. That's number one. But I thought was extremely interesting was the following thought. I was thinking about this morning, actually. It's interesting that the Gemara makes a big deal out of the fact that the arrangers of the Shemona Esrei, right, arrange it in a particular order. The Shemona Esrei basically is related to, and actually all our prayers are related to biblical verses. That's for sure. There's a lot of interest in that right now. The main guy who works on that is a guy named Reuven Kimmelman in Boston. He does a lot of good work on that. I've been thinking about getting more deeply into that and writing about it. I have many good thoughts about that. So the point is that it says they wrote it ala seder. They wrote the blessings, the Shemona Esrei, with a particular order in mind. And the Gemara goes through the order, as we know, the order of the Amidah. So what is the blessing? So with the way it works, if you remember the Amidah by heart, the way it works is it starts with a prayer for wisdom, right? Then for forgiveness, right? We ask God for forgiveness, tshuva. Then there's a prayer for of deliverance. Look at our suffering, our state, take our side, right? Help us out, right? Be our redeemer. That's the next blessing. And then you have Rifainu. Be our redeemer. And then the next blessing, after be our redeemer, go El Yisrael. The next blessing is for health. So the adjoining of the two blessings does certainly suggest that the prayer for health, Rifainu, for healing, right, is a prayer for not just physical healing, but for spiritual healing as well. And we find that in many places. And actually, I would say that in Yirmiyahu it appears many times. The idea of a healer, that God is a healer, is something that we come across in Yirmiyahu many times, and also in the Psalms. We come across it in the Psalms, that God should heal us, refers to a spiritual healing. What I thought was very interesting was the next blessing. What is the blessing after Rifainu, actually? The blessing after Rifainu is Baruch Aleinu Hashem Elokeinu et Hashana Hazot Be'kominei Tefillah Torah Tova. It's a blessing for Parnasa, basically, it's what it is. But it takes the form of rain. It's a blessing for, now, and B'tein Talu B'Atalu V'Cha P'nei Adama, it's a precipitation. So in the rainy season, we pray for rain. So it is to me very interesting that the blessing for healing and deliverance and the blessing for water are one after the other. And actually, in the verse in Yirmiyahu, that obviously is the basis for the blessing for Rifainu, what adjoins, what leads into the blessing for healing is, or the request for healing is all about God as source of water, which is a source of life, which of course is exactly the blessing of the Shemona Esrei, because the water in Shemona Esrei, actually, we ask for rain. But it's clear from its inception, I don't mean later on, it's a reinterpretation. It's pretty clear that when the blessing for rain, request for rain was made, that it was about actually, was about making a living, basically. In those days, it was the agricultural society, so people are talking about rain, but rain is actually, a request for sustenance. So it's interesting to see how the blessings of the Amidah actually play off what is the plain, pretty much the implied by these verses in Yirmiyahu, which are the end of the Haftarah. And even more striking is, if you look at the way it's written in the text of Yirmiyahu, you notice that Rifa'eni Hashem ve'erafei, Hoshea v'yivashea ki ti'ata is not the end of the previous section. It's actually the beginning of the new section. You can see that because there's a samach there. You can see that straight out. So you see that's actually the beginning of a new section. But those who put the Haftarah together decided to append the first verse of the new section to the old section. Therefore, I think underscoring or emphasizing the connection between the prayer for healing and the prayer for and seeing God as the source of all life, which takes the form of the source was water, the living waters. And that's reflected, of course, in our Amidah. First, we ask for Rifa'enu, which is exactly Hoshea v'yivashea will be delivered. So healing means deliverance. And the very next blessing, the order we have it in the Shemona Esrei, is Baruch Aleinu Hashem Elokeinu et Hashana Hazot B'tein Talu B'Atalu V'Cha, right? To bless the year, but it takes the form of the water. So I wanted to make that point about, interesting to see how these verses in Yirmiyahu become the source, not just of Haftarah, but actually one of the biblical sources of two of the blessings that we have in our Amidah, the prayer for healing and the prayer for sustenance, which takes the form of the prayer for rain. It's interesting. Okay, that's as far as the Haftarah we saw 2 weeks. I wanted to finish that up. I wanted to begin with two things today. One is just to begin with the Haftarah that we read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And then I did want to say something about the Megillah at the end, just a thought about the Megillah. You can talk about the Megillah forever, but all right. So the Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah is actually one of the Haftarahs of Consolation. There were 3 or 4 chapters in Yirmiyahu, depending how you read it. I think 4 chapters in Yirmiyahu which could be called Haftarot of chapters of consolation. Not all gloom and doom in the book. Is Haftarahs of consolation, and one of them is chapter 31. The chapter is very, very interesting for many reasons. Well, the first part of it is the Haftarah. So
1236 in the arts.
yeah, in the JPS is the article 1236. Okay, so this is the you have a book.
I happened to have opened it last night.
Okay, there it is. All right. Lamed Aleph. Ko Amar Hashem. There's always a question, by the way, when you see a Haftarah. Your question always is, what is the relationship between the Haftarah on one hand and either the Parsha or the day? So when you have a Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah is the most interesting of all, because the Torah readings of Rosh Hashanah and the Haftarot of Rosh Hashanah never mention Rosh Hashanah. Truth of the matter is, the Torah virtually says nothing about Rosh Hashanah altogether. Nothing. Shall be a day of Trua, it says, or Zichron Trua, Yom Trua. There's really nothing in Rosh Hashanah in the Chumash. There's not, virtually nothing. So that left up an opportunity for our tradition to try to figure out what is Rosh Hashanah about. So I just talked about it in the past, but I'll leave that for now. But in any event, we'll see. So through the prism of the Haftarah, sometimes you get a sense about what they felt Rosh Hashanah is about. So this is one of the Haftarah of consolation, very beautiful Haftarah, second day Rosh Hashanah. And actually, it's very interesting, just as a side point, to take note of the fact there were 2 days Rosh Hashanah. I mean, there weren't always 2 days Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, the Chumash is 1 day. But very early on, even in the land of Israel, they were different, actually probably at the same time, different customs, whether you keep 1 day or 2 days. We know there's an ancient dispute about that very early on as to the antiquity of this, the antiquity of 2 days Rosh Hashanah in the land of Israel. Chumash is 1 day. In any event, so we know that very early on there was already 2 days, and there's reasons given in the Gemara, etc. So there were 4 readings. There are 2 readings from the Torah, obviously, and the 2 readings from the Haftarah, which is the prophet, the Navi. Now, what's striking is the Gemara talks primarily about the first day Rosh Hashanah, because there's only 1 day Rosh Hashanah. So on the first day, the Gemara says, when we have 1 day, we read, the Gemara says, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah from the Torah, they give you the beginning. They'll tell you where it ends. Vashem Pakadet Sarah. On Rosh Hashanah, you read Vashem Pakadet Sarah, which we do. God delivered Sarah. God remembered Sarah. And the Haftarah for the first day of Rosh Hashanah is the story of Chana. That's what the Gemara says. Okay, so we do that. The Gemara never said how long if you only had 1 day Rosh Hashanah, where you would end the reading. Because Hashem Pakadet Sarah is chapter 21 in Bereshit. Chapter 22 is the binding of Isaac. So we are reading on the second day Rosh Hashanah, we read Akedat Yitzchak, which becomes very significant for Rosh Hashanah. But Akedat Yitzchak actually is a continuation of Hashem Pakadet Sarah. It's very hard to know, actually, when they had 1 day Rosh Hashanah where they stopped. Maybe they read the Akedah. Maybe they had a very long Torah reading. Who knows? We'll never know. I mean, maybe we'll someday know, but we don't know now. So, and the Haftarah for the second day Rosh Hashanah is this chapter. Now, what's very striking is, and actually quite interesting, that of 3 of the 4 readings, and maybe actually initially 2 out of 2 readings, or certainly 2 out of 2 readings, are all about women, actually. The heroes of Rosh Hashanah in the Kriya are 3, the readings are 3. One is Sarah, one is Chana, and one is Rachel, who's mentioned over. It's the way the Haftarah is. Rachel Mevaka Abonah. It's very striking. The liturgy is not that at all. The liturgy is the hero of the Rosh Hashanah davening, and the liturgy is actually Avraham. He's the main character. The Akedah is very significant in the davening. We mentioned the Akedah in the davening. We mentioned it in a very interesting place. Maybe we'll get there today or next time. I don't know. But we mentioned it in the davening in Rosh Hashanah, and in one of the most significant places. We also mentioned in the davening of Rosh Hashanah a verse from the Haftarah. It was always interesting to see where something is found. You know, it's very, let's say a lot of stuff that I do is about illusion, intertext, and all that business. Certain words that are mentioned X number of times. It's never sufficient just to say it's mentioned 7 times, 14 times, 3 times, 10 times. It borrows certain words from this. it's always important to see where the words are used, or where they're taking the story from. It's not just counting up numbers, because it's not just that. It's actually, what is the text that they're actually addressing? What is the primary text they're addressing? Why are they addressing that? How do they understand it? That's what makes this approach very interesting, such as about counting words. It's not about that. I mean, the words, that is significant in a way, but it's not about that. In any event, so this is the Haftorah for second day of Rosh Hashanah. Kol Amar Hashem. Yeah, go ahead. Very, yes, it is extremely beautiful. The Haftorah in general some of them are stunning, you know. This one is Haftorah for Yom Kippur. It's so, I mean, because what is Yom Kippur? I say, oh, open up the Haftorah. It says what it is about, actually, right smack in the Haftorah. People think the Haftorah is secondary. The Haftorah actually is trying to explain at least what the rabbinic tradition thought Yom Kippur is about. And the same thing over here. This is one of the beautiful, it's very beautiful, very stirring story. Anyway, let's see how far we get. Go ahead.
מצא חן במדבר עם שרידי חרב, הלוך ירגיעו ישראל. מרחוק אדוני נראה לי, באהבת עולם אהבתיך. או זה אהבתיך. על כן משכתיך אהבתי. עוד אלך ונבנך בתולת ישראל. עוד תעדי טיפי ויצאת במחול משחקים. עוד איתי כרמים בהרי שומרון, נתנו נוטעים בכליל. כי יש יום קראו נוצרים בהר אפרים, קומו ונעלה ציון אל אדוני אלוהים.
Okay, this is very beautiful and very powerful, yeah? It is truly. What's interesting, first of all, the interesting thing here, among many, is that Israel is a woman, actually, of course. But even more interesting than that is that, and this is actually a very important point in the book of Yirmiyahu, it's true also in Yechezkel. We have to remember that when Yirmiyahu is prophesying in the land of Israel, and Yechezkel prophesies in Babel, he's in about pretty much the same time, that there are two different communities. There's a community in Israel, because this is taking place before the destruction of the temple. So there's a community in Israel, in Jerusalem, not northern Israel. Northern Israel was exiled 100 years earlier. They're the 10 tribes, whatever. They're gone. That's the northern kingdom. That's Israel. They're known as. Yehuda is still in the land. So in the book of Yirmiyahu and in Yechezkel, both, they talk about these two different communities. It's very interesting maybe we'll have a chance in the future to compare that. We touched upon it briefly the last set of sessions, but what's interesting is that the northern kingdom, there are many names for the northern kingdom. One is Israel. One is Ephraim or Yosef. Yosef is represented because the head of the northern kingdom starts with the Yeravim and Nevat. So he's from Yosef. So there's Yosef in the north, one might say in Yehuda, the old split between Yosef and Yehuda, the two leaders. Now the capital of the northern kingdom is Samaria, Shomron. So what's interesting is, if you look at the prophecy here, he doesn't seem to be referring primarily to the Jews who live now in Judah who will be exiled. He talks about those in the north, or those who have been scattered to the lands of the north, and Harei Shomron. He says, O titni kramim b'harei Shomron. He says that he's prophesying about the future. And we never know in Yirmiyahu, first of all, in Yirmiyahu, unlike Yechezkel, you never know when the prophecy takes place. If the book is not written in any kind of chronological order. So maybe the prophecy took place much earlier. Maybe he's referring, some have suggested, when because Jeremiah starts prophesying when Yoshio is still the king. He's the righteous king who does all the reforms. And during the reign of Yoshio, it's clear there were attempts to bring Jews back from the north. So it is conceivable, it's only possible, that this prophecy is referring to that, is from that time. And when it was stated, it was referring to people at that time. That's certainly a possibility, but certainly the way we have it, it suggests that it's not just about that particular time, but it's a prophecy for the future. And that he's prophesying that sometime in the future, the remnant is going to return. That's a very important point. You have to remember, that's one of the very important themes in the book, and you have it in Yechezkel as well. If the Jews in Israel and if the Jews outside Israel, what do they think of each other? What do they think of themselves? What is there a future for them or not? So this particular prophecy, yes, there will be a time, yes, Yom, that the watchers at Har Ephraim, it seems very Har Ephraim. Ephraim is Joseph. Ephraim is the northern kingdom, right? There will be a time, says Yirmiyahu. I think it's even more powerful given the fact that Yirmiyahu is saying this. It's not somebody who's Mr. Sunshine exactly, you know what I mean? It's a really gloomy book for the most part. And here he comes in chapter 31 with this prophecy of rebirth, even for those in the north. And it starts off, Kol Mar Hashem, Matzachen Bamidbar Amsri De Chareb. So he talks about, he refers back to leaving Mitzrayim, to leaving Egypt, going out into the desert, right? And that was a journey towards Israel, right? That was a journey marching home, right? Meirachok Hashem Niroli. What does Meirachok mean?
But if it's Israel, what's Sri Dechara? It's not.
Well, the question is, right. So the question is how we describe the experience in Egypt. Well, what do you mean? They threw the boys in the river. They try to kill us. So let's not forget that, you know what I mean? With all that, the fact it didn't work, or we managed somehow to, who knows how many died in the rivers? How do we know? Who was a clue? We don't know how many died, you know? It's you know, I was thinking about it, walking here today, you know, this business with this virus that's going on. And, you know, I don't blame the Chinese people at all, but I do blame the Chinese government. And we have to remember, think about the mass murderers of the 20th century, Hitler, Stalin. I don't think Mao Zedong's too far behind, by the way. You have to remember that. You're talking about killing on a level. So what do they care, you know? And the fact is, what do we know what happened in Mitzrayim? We know what Paro said, throw all the boys in the river. We know Moshe was saved. We don't know, and we know presumably that means that people with their ingenuity and their courage are trying to survive, basically. It happens in every Holocaust. So what do we know? So the fact that he says, Am Sri De Charev, is probably, that's Yirmiyahu's take on it. I mean, the prophets allowed poetic license, you know, but okay, it wasn't a cherev. It was the same effect, throwing them into the water. It was drowning the boys, basically. And with the girls, it wasn't they loved the girls. They wanted to take the girls. We'll take them. It wasn't that just the boys. No, we'll kill the men and take the women, you know, as what we haven't said for Bereshit, you know, with the concern. There's no fear of God in this place. They'll kill me and they'll take you. So that's Am Sri De Charev. So the past redemption becomes a hope for the future. The idea that when we pray in the Amidah, we have to begin by remembering redemption. Smichas Gul L'Tfilah. What leads us into our prayers is there's a possibility of deliverance. That's a very important point. I'll get to that later when I say a few words about the Megillah. That deliverance is possible. It's not impossible. Because it happened once before. If it happened once before, so maybe it'll happen again, right? You never know. The question sometimes more optimistic and sometimes less optimistic. But the possibility is always there. Merachok Hashem Nirali. Merachok does not mean here. Rachok means far away. Merachok Hashem Nirali. It's actually interesting that Moshe was saved by his sister who stands Merachok. It's interesting. But Merachok here probably means time-wise, not spatial. Merachok means the past. God in the past, Merachok, you have that in biblical Hebrew, that sometimes the same word has a spatial meaning and has a temporal meaning. So the prophet begins by recalling the past and recalling the deliverance of the past. And the point is that event of the past is not something that happened in the past and is forgotten. The past is very much part of our present. That's how you begin the Haftorah. Akein b'shachti chased means today. In other words, the fact that God delivered us in the past is a sign for Yirmiyahu that God plans sometime in the future, who knows when, to bring us back. And even those that are so far away, even those of the Northern Kingdom, which were exiled 100 years early before the South. But nonetheless, there's a possibility of fight. Let's continue now.
Is it okay that I say the name of God?
Yeah, of course. If you read the whole pasuk, you can do that, right?
Should I go on, right?
Yes.
כי כה אמר אדוני, קרונו ליעקב שמחה, וצהלו בראש הגויים, השמיעו. הללו ואמרו, הושע אדוני את עמך את שארית ישראל. ישראל. הנני מביא אותם מארץ צפון, וקיבצתי מירכתי ארץ, בם עיוור ופיסח, הרה ויולדת, יחדיו, קהל גדול ישובו הנה.
But he envisions actually this return. He envisions the return, Kibasti miyakate aretz, from the corners of the earth, from the farthest places of the earth. And it's interesting, I will bring them from the north. Here it means from right? The north actually sometimes means far away. It means danger. But sometimes it means I'm going to, in the Tochacha, I will bring you a nation from far away. Meirachok, actually. So over here, the deliverance is Meirachok, from far away, the remnant of Israel. And it's interesting whom he describes as coming. He has four types. He has the blind and the lame. Okay, that week. Then he has the pregnant women and the ones who presumably just give birth. Now, why does he mention these four together, actually? It's a good question. I was thinking about this. Why does he mention these four? What do you think? Could be the fear. Could be. But Iver Piseach, why would that represent the past, though? Right. So I think it's those people who normally wouldn't come. Somebody bringing them from very far away. They're not taking the Dreamliner airplane, you know what I mean? Which was 6 hours late yesterday, but doesn't matter. The point is, it means those people that would have difficulty coming. The people that, for example, when the Mishnah talks about Aliyah L'Regel, the blind, because the whole Gemara in Chagiga starts the whole thing. Who has to go 3 times a year on the pilgrimage? Okay. Question whether women have to go all together, but the point is, it says to see God. Well, the blind person can't see. Is the blind person exempt? The Gemara talks about that. Someone who can't walk. How can, right? How do you get there? So they're exempted. So a woman who's very pregnant, let's say, it's very hard, presuming that it's hard for her to travel. Well, she just gave birth. She just gave birth, so she's seen as someone whose life is potentially in danger. She's a sick person. So therefore, that's how the halacha sees it. So the point is, it means everybody's coming. That's the point. Even those people you wouldn't expect to be able to come, somehow they're going to get there. Somehow I will bring them there. On their own. Exactly. That's exactly the point. On their own. I'm going to make sure they get there, says God, one way or the other. One way or the other, everybody's coming. Kahal Gadol, everybody is included. This idea of everybody coming back, which is part and parcel of the larger picture of those of the Northern Kingdom coming back. The Northern Kingdom.
It's exactly what can without a new heart.
That's possible. Yep. We'll get to that. Not today. The new heart is very important, but we'll leave it for now. But the important point. Yep. Could be so. Well, that's what the Kabbalists think for sure. Sinister. That's the left-handed. So the point is, that is true. That north in biblical Hebrew means, as Tzafon is the north. Darom is Binyamin. Right. Right. So what? No, of course, right. But she's suggesting that it's more than it's actually the left hand that is seen. There is a whole tradition about about lefties. You know what I mean? So, right. So sinister. The word sinister is the left hand. Anyway, let's continue. Right. Okay, so let's just stop here for a moment. So first of all, you see the focus on Ephraim. Ephraim being the younger son of Joseph, but the favored son of Joseph. Because you remember Yaakov, though he blesses the two sons identically, he gives one blessing to two. No different than the blessing, but he switches his hands and he put his right hand on the head of Ephraim. The young one will also be great, but this is different. This is Ephraim, what he represents in the Chumash. The Chumash, he represents the understanding of Joseph that Egypt is not a place. It's a place of suffering. That's true. Over here, again, you have the image of the water. Zella mentioned before. Here you have the water again. Over you have the same image that we saw earlier in chapter 17. They will come, they'll be crying, and I will bring them b'tachanunim. It's actually, tachanunim is a hard word in this context over here. From the word chen. Here they translate it as compassion. It could be the meaning of it. So this is, and they say, and b'derech yashar, or yikashlu ba, is actually very interesting. They will come b'derech yashar, on a straight path. And here, I think the prophet is recalling for us, and this is very important in these chapters, the idea of Jacob becoming Israel. Israel means Sar, but also means Yashar. For example, in the book of Devarim, Israel is called Yeshurun. Yeshurun is basically Israel. We're sitting right here, right? KJ is Yeshurun, is it right? So it's Yeshurun. So Yeshurun is Yashar. So I'm going to bring them back, right? Ephraim b'choriu. So Ephraim is my b'chor. Yeah. Good, excellent point. That is an excellent point. That's an excellent point. And actually, since Suri said a very good thing, everybody hear what Suri said? She said very nicely that Yashar here, I'll take them out in a straight path, could be a contrast to the way the Haftorah begins. It recalls the Exodus from Egypt. And the Exodus from Egypt, the Torah says that God did not take us on a straight path. God took us, God took us on a circuitous route. On the return, will be straight. And it's interesting, just to, it's related to what you're saying, but it's related to what you're saying, but in the Tochacha, right? In the Tochacha in Sefer Devarim, so the end of the Tochacha is chapter 28 in Devarim, towards the very, very end of the Tochacha, it says, Veshivcha, the last verse, Veshivcha Hashem Mitzrayim Badiyot. I will send you back to Egypt in boats, on the path that you said you're never going back there again. And you will sell yourselves as male and female slaves. They ain't koded. Nobody will buy you, and nobody will redeem you, whatever. Why did the Torah mention, I will send you back to Egypt in boats? What does that mean? I'll send you back on the yacht. I'll send you back in boats. The point is, when we left Egypt, we need boats. We walked through the water. We took us out of Mitzrayim. God splits the sea. So we walked through the water. There's no boats. There's no water. We went, B'tocha Yam B'Yabashah, right? That's where I took you out of Egypt, says God. That's one thing. There's all kinds of miracles. When you go back to Egypt, you won't have the miracles. You go back in boats. You're right. That's the contrast there is interesting. So somebody says similarly over here, the contrast between Yashar on one hand, the straight path, and the circuitous way we left Mitzrayim, that's very interesting. And that actually ties in with what Shmuel was getting at, which I'm not getting to this week, about remembering the way we left Egypt and the difference between the way we left Egypt in the past and what the future portends. So we'll see that's a very important theme actually in Yirmiyahu, but that's for the future. Okay, let's continue now. Go ahead. Right, the one who scattered Israel, God now announces to the nations, Mizarei Yisrael, the one who scattered Israel in the past, because the punishment is exile in Yirmiyahu, scattered amongst the nations, and not just in Yirmiyahu, in the Chumash actually. I will disperse you amongst the nations, and you will serve other gods. Part of the punishment, you lose your way. The very same God who scattered us among the nations will bring us back. Okay, watch us like a shepherd, like a shepherd watches the flock. Go ahead. Right, that's a verse we should be familiar with from our prayers. The evening prayer of redemption before the Shemona Esrei, before Ashkivenu, has this verse, cites this verse. God has redeemed Israel. What I said before, it happened once before. The reason the Exodus is so important is because if it happened once, it's possible that it may happen again. So, but go ahead. You see Jacob is mentioned here explicitly. Pada Hashem et Yaakov. Yaakov is very important in the Haftorah. We'll see how far. Just tell me what time it is. At 11, I wanted to say a few words about Megillah. 20 of 11. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
ובחורים וזקנים יחדיו, והפכתי אבלם לששון, וניחמתים ושימחתים מיגונם. וריוויתי נפש הכהנים דשן, ועמי את טובי יתבעו נאום אדוני.
Okay, this is actually the end of the first part of the Haftorah. I did want to say one thing about very well read. I wanted to say one thing about Perhaps the reason they chose the Haftorah, among other reasons, because again, they could have started from where we're going to read next. But one of the interesting questions about Rosh Hashanah, which comes up in the medievals, talk about this a lot, is to what degree is Rosh? I mean, and today you have the same question, of course. To what degree is Rosh Hashanah a day of joy? You know, there are different ways people, practice and experience Rosh Hashanah. There's some places where it's a solemn day, very long davening. What, a way of what? Right. So there's two different elements to Rosh Hashanah, which in a certain way are contradictory. There's one theme of one practice of the Torah never speaks about rejoicing on Rosh Hashanah. Let's start with that. There's no simcha. The simcha in the Chumash only mentions simcha in connection with two holidays. The rabbinic tradition has it with a third holiday, Sukkot and Shavuot. In the Chumash, it says "V'samachta b'chagecha." The Gemara presumes that it's not just Shavuot and Sukkot, but it's also it's also Pesach. Shalosh Regalim, it's also Pesach. So that's the assumption. The question is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. On those days, now the Mishnah does mention Simcha with Yom Kippur. The Mishnah says there were no happier days than Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. So Yom Kippur actually it mentions Simcha, and the Gemara says I understand Yom Kippur is a day of Simcha because it's a day of atonement. But why is Tu B'Av a happy day? But Rosh Hashanah the Gemara never discusses. So the Rishonim talk about it, the whole discussion. So I was thinking that actually the Haftorah, which we read on Rosh Hashanah, talks about Simcha. Verse number 30. Os tismach b'tulah b'machol u'bacharim u'skenim yachdav v'hafachti evlam u'sason v'nichamtim v'simachtim b'gonam. The word Simcha and Sason are mentioned right here in a very prominent way in the Haftorah. I had two thoughts about that as to what the idea of Simcha is. First of all, the Simcha in the Haftorah is about redemption. It's about, what might I say, redemption, and I would say forgiveness, perhaps as well. Redemption, forgiveness. V'nichamtim v'simachtim b'golam. God says, "I will comfort them," says God. Right? I will take them back. So to some extent, you could see that Rosh Hashanah as a day of Simcha, that the Simcha is coming out of, like as the Gemara says about Yom Kippur. Of course, it's a day of Simcha. It's a day of forgiveness. Now, on Rosh Hashanah is different than Yom Kippur, but the aspect of forgiveness, the idea of the beginning of the process of forgiveness, starts with Rosh Hashanah. Aseret Yemei Tshuva. So many, perhaps in the Haftorah. That's one point. And the second point, right? Yes, we do have it in the liturgy. On the other hand, we don't call it Yemei Sasson v'Simcha. In the davening, it's not called days of Sasson and Simcha, right? There, it's actually take covenant Hashem liyamecha, Simcha liyatzecha, Sasson liyamecha can be seen as a prayer for the future. Tain, but not that it is right now, but someday you will give honor to your people. Simcha liyatzecha, Sasson liyamecha, all those other prayers. Someday you'll be God of the whole world. Right now, you're not, but someday, Tain pach Hashem l'Elokeinu chol b'asecha. So there's actually a hope more than. But it's never in the davening is it called. It's very important to pay attention to what we say in the davening. Very important. It doesn't call it Yemei Simcha. It's not called Yemei Simcha, and there's a big discussion about that. But I was thinking something else about this idea of forgiveness as being a source of Simcha, and that is that V'hafachti evlam l'sason. This is actually I'm not sure it's intended by those who chose the Haftorah, but it could be. The way that our calendar is constructed, okay, this is actually very interesting, that the calendar was constructed for us, that we have Tisha B'Av, and we read the Haftarot, of course. It's very striking. Let's talk about this now. The Haftarot you read before Tisha B'Av, the three of them. Two of them are from Yirmiyahu, and the Haftarah of Tisha B'Av is also from Yirmiyahu, right? The Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah, the second day at least, is also from Yirmiyahu. And here it says, "V'afachli evlam," right? I will turn their mourning to joy. So the idea of that Rosh Hashanah actually is the culmination of a process that begins with Tisha B'Av, which is 100% certainly true, because you see this the way our Torah readings are constructed, and they never change in this respect. that after Tisha B'Av, Shabbos after Tisha B'Av, Shabbos Nachamu, is the first of 7 Haftarot, Shiva de Nechemta. The 7th of which is what, by the way? How's the 7th one start? I spoke about that at my mother's funeral, that Haftarah. It's very powerful. It's a dedication to my book, the last verse. So sis Bashem. So sis. I will rejoice in God. It's the last of Shiva de Nechemta, right? And it always, without exception, is the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. Always. There's never a change. So you see straight out, in terms of the liturgy, that they're linking, Tisha B'Av, which is a day of mourning, to Rosh Hashanah, which begins the process of reconciliation, of redemption. And the last Haftorah is Soso Sis Bashem. And the Haftorah of Rosh Hashanah is Vafachti Evlam L'Sason. So I think this is, you might say it's a drush of mine. Okay. But I think it's actually has something to it. I think actually it is getting at something very basic. And the more important point for us is that what we read in the davening, in the shul, and all this other stuff that was prepared for us by many people, right? It's always good to think about when you have a tradition that's 1,000 years old. I don't care where it's coming from. It always, I think, is the right thing to begin with the assumption that there's something to it. They're trying to say something here. And this is very, very striking. Rosh Hashanah is a day about what the Chumash says virtually nothing. So it gave a lot of room for the rabbinic tradition to step in and to make all kinds of suggestions as to what the day is actually about. So that was I wanted to say 2 things about this verse. The consensus, the Rambam says famously, what does the Rambam say? Rosh Hashanah? Is it a day of Simcha? It's not a day. Rosh Hashanah, he says, is not Simcha Yetera. It's not exceptional Simcha. But you see, by the way, from our halacha, that Rosh Hashanah is a day of Simcha. How do you see that from the halacha? How do you know? Certainly a day of Simcha, without question. It's a contradiction because it's also a day of judgment. The judgment is frightening because there's a great fear of Rosh Hashanah. There's also the joy of Rosh Hashanah to stand in God's presence. You see it from the halacha because if someone's a mourner, Rosh Hashanah stops the mourning. Yom Tov breaks up what Shabbos doesn't break up the mourning. Either because if Shabbos broke up the mourning, you'd never have Shiva, right? You need 7 days. But the other reason, Shabbos is actually that day of Simcha. Even though in the Zmiris you have Simcha, but actually in Halacha and in our liturgy, you'll never find Simcha with Shabbos, ever. You have other things. You have Oneg on Shabbos. You have Ratzon on Shabbos. You have Nechama on Shabbos. You never find Simcha with Shabbos. Right, that's not part of the key davening. That's true. That is true. Yismachu b'malchus, you have in Musaf, but from the core text of the davening, the Chasimus, you have Ratzon. Ratzon is very central. Ritzei on Shabbos, say Ritzei. That's different, exactly. So Shabbos is not actually, and for example, even in terms of mourning, there's a whole question. The mourner doesn't observe the mourning on Shabbos. The question is there no mourning on Shabbos at all? Or is there certain things you do mourn? Things that are private? Is it knowing on Shabbos or not? Is a big question. So the point is, I think we possibly it is knowing on Shabbos. The fact is, maybe Yom Tov is not knowing. Shabbos it is knowing. So the point is, so there is some kind of mourning on Shabbos. Shabbos is actually part of the Shiva. That's what's very interesting. It's part of what? Kaddish they do with mourning. Say Kaddish for 11 months. Kaddish they do with mourning. Well, there's a custom to say Kaddish, but the actual Kaddish was not initially for a private person who's saying, right? No, it's a custom. It's a big deal for many people, but it has nothing to do with the Gemara doesn't mention it. The practice of mourning, of washing and cleaning and clothing and all that kind of thing. That's what the Gemara talks about that, and so that's a different story. So you see that Rosh Hashanah breaks up the Avelos basically. If you're a mourner, and it's 3 days later is Rosh Hashanah, it's over because it's a day. There is a day of Simcha. The Rambam says it is Simcha, but it's not extreme Simcha. It's not Simcha Yetera, he says, but Simcha it is. Okay, this is the first part of the Haftorah. Now let's start with the second part. Just tell me when it's about 11 or so now. Go ahead. Okay.
הכל ברמה נשמע, והיא בכי תמרורים. רחל מבכה על בניה, נענה להנחם על בניה, כי איננו.
Let's just focus on this pasuk, and maybe we'll continue with this next week. So first of all, the question is, what does it mean, Kol Barama Nishma? What does Barama mean? This is a big question. What is Kol Barama Nishma? So there are two possibilities. One possibility is that Ramah is a place, right? Ramah is a place. We know, for example, there was a very famous person who lived in Ramah, Shmuel. Shmuel lives in Ramah. That's his main home. He's a prophet who goes to different places. He has a circuit, but he comes home to his house in Ramah. That's where his house is. There he builds a mizbeach. So Ramah is a place. That's for sure, right? I don't know. Right. So the Ramah could mean something else. You have, for example, in the beginning of Yirmiyahu, in the prophecies of mourning, the word Shvayim. Shvayim is a high place. There's a voice is heard in a high place, a voice of wailing in the high places. So Kol Barama Nishma could be that a cry is heard in a high place, not necessarily in from Ramah. The question that intrigued many people, I don't know what we have in the States, but in Israel, there are many people who deal with the geography of the Bible. There's a guy named Elitzur, Yovel Elitzur is one of them. There are others too. And many in Israel, and they're very connected to the land there and geography. The problem that intrigued many people, I mean, I've talked about it, I know little about geography, but the problem is that when it comes to Rachel, we have 3 different places in the Bible that ascribes her burial place to a different place. If Ramah means Ramah, the place Ramah, so that's where, if we hear Rachel's voice from Ramah, presumably she's buried in Ramah. But when you open up the Chumash, it says that she died Derech Ephrata hi Beit Lechem, on the road to Ephrat, which is Bethlehem. Ephrat and Beit Lechem are very close. You wouldn't know it, you're in Israel, by the way, but they actually, and I was in Beit Lechem to meet with some people a while back. It's right there. I mean, it's very close. It's like another world, but it's very close. And then when you open up the book of Shmuel, remember that Samuel tells Saul he's going to give some signs. In chapter 9, chapter 10 of Shmuel, and the first sign is you will go to Tzeltzach in the land of Benjamin, where it is, and you will go to Rachel's grave. So you have in Shmuel, chapter 10, Tzeltzach, which is in Binyamin, land of Binyamin. They're called Binyamin today. You have Ramah here in Yirmiyahu, and you have Derech Ephrata in Beit Lechem. It's interesting, by the way. It's very interesting. There's something called Tosfot Rabban. I was talking about this on Shabbos with my brother-in-law, and Avi Wolfish is a big Tosfot. Tosfot Rabban. Tosfot Rabban is like this. The Ramban, we have a commentary of the Ramban in the Torah. There are a bunch of Israelis now who have been working for many years on collecting what's called Tosfot Rabban. This is unbelievably interesting. The Ramban wrote his commentary on the Torah. He didn't write it all at the same time. I'll just make this point. We'll have to stop. We'll continue this next week. This is very beautiful stuff here. But so the Ramban, first of all, we tried. They want to try to figure out when did he write what. We know certain things he writes when he goes to Israel. At the end of his life, a few years before he dies, he goes to Israel, and he writes in his commentary about Rachel's grave. He writes it. He says, "Now that I'm in Israel, that we have. Now that I'm in Israel and I see the geography, I realize where Ephrat and Beit Lechem are." He actually says this. He talks about this. Unbelievable. But apparently, they found manuscripts, many of the Ramban, that are not included in this commentary on the Torah, called Tosfot Ramban. And they're working to try to figure this out, when he wrote it, what he says. A whole bunch of Israelis. It's been published recently, I think. It's unbelievable. That's Tosfot Ramban. The Ramban, what we do know is that when the Ramban comes to Israel, I think he first goes to Jerusalem, but then he goes to Akko. And the last thing that we know of that he writes, speaking of Rosh Hashanah, is a drasha for Rosh Hashanah. The Ramban goes to the shul in Akko, and he gives a drasha. It's a long drasha. Gives a drasha in the shul. Now, believe me, This is not the drasha I'm talking about when you go to shul in the United States of America, the rabbi's drasha. It's an unbelievable thing. You read this thing. Now, what's fascinating about the Ramban in Akko is this. The Ramban, of course, one of the greats. I mean, he's unbelievable. Giant. I mean, giant in many different things. A giant in Talmud, a giant in Chumash, a giant in Kabbalah, you name it. I mean, the guy's gigantic. So the Ramban is Spanish, but he doesn't learn Talmud from the Spaniards. His rebbes are actually two of the Balei HaTosfot. And not only does he learn from the Tosafos, he adopts their approach, which was this approach of seeing the entire, Tosafos changed learning, period. So his two rebbes are Tosafos. Now what's interesting is a fact of the Rabban goes to Israel maybe 1260 or so. He dies in 1270. In the 13th century, there was an aliyah to the land of Israel from France and Germany because the Turks took over then. And the Turks were bad. I forget the other group, the Arab group, terrible. I forget their name. They were awful. And the Turks got rid of them. And they took over. It was much better in Israel for the people living there, for the Jews. And Europe was no picnic. So there were two big aliyot from France, including 1215, the Rishwani was one of the giants. These are the big Balei HaTosfot to go there, and they go to Akko. Now, what's amazing is you have a shul of Balei HaTosfot there. And these were not they themselves, but their progenitors were the rebbes of the Ramban. Ramban's their pupil, basically. Not their pupil, but Ramban's a giant. So were they. And he gives the drasha. What's interesting, he gives the drasha in the shul to them, and he picks up, actually, and switches around. It's also kind of halachic stuff. It's unbelievable. But he also picks up on what the Balei HaTosfot had said. Can you imagine this scene? The Rabbi going to shul, and he's talking to the Balei HaTosfot, and he's talking, in a way, talking their language. I don't know what language he actually spoke. It's a good question. What did he speak? I don't know what he spoke. He didn't speak Yiddish, just but I don't know what he spoke. But this is incredible to me. So that's the last thing we have in the Ramban. Now we have these Tosfot Ramban. So they tried to date. Maybe he said something afterwards. But what's known as the last thing the Ramban says is his drasha for Rosh Hashanah. It's all about halacha, about the Gemaras, the Pilpul, and everything. It's unbelievable. No, right. Tosfot means extras. That's all. Additions. Yeah, no, of course. But the Ramban learned from the Balei HaTosfot. Right, Tosfot on the Talmud. There is Tosfot on the Chumash too, by the way. Some amazing. Yeah, exactly. And there's some amazing stuff. So the point is, there's all kinds of the last, 15, 20 years. I met someone else over the weekend, actually here, I was in Israel, but there's all kinds of interesting happening, and they're discovering all these manuscripts, they're putting them out. It's unbelievable what's actually a new world, really, It's just a new world. Anyway, let me say one thing about the Megillah, and I'll stop. What time is it, about 11:10? I'll say one thing about the Megillah, which is this. The Megillah, that we love dearly. So the Megillah, chapter 4 of the Megillah begins, Mordechai Yadai, give it the Megillah. Mordechai Yadai Kol Asher Nasa. That's how chapter 4 begins. Mordechai knew all that was Kol Asher Nasa. You see the text? Kol Asher Nasa. So first of all, just say as a parenthetical remark about the Megillah, Mordechai knew Kol Asher Nasa. The language that was done. Na'asa is a passive verb. Right? Na'asa, that which was done. One of the interesting features of the Megillah is the constant use of the passive voice. Constant, right? My favorite verse is chapter 2, verse 1. After these things, after Vashti was deposed, when the king's anger abated, so Charet Vashti v'et asher asata, v'et asher digzar aleha. I love that verse. He remembered all that Vashti had done and that which was decreed about her. Now, of course, when you see the story in chapter 1, Vashti did nothing. The point of Vashti doing is not doing it. The point of what did Vashti do? I'm not coming to your steak party, basically what she said, to parade me before the boys. Not interested. So that's what she did, so-called asata. That's what she did. V'et asher nigzar aleha. But that which was decreed, exactly. And the point is, it's not nigzar aleha. The king determines, and many different words are used, to issue a judgment about Vashti. he issues judgment about her. He makes a royal edict that she shall not come to the king, right? And she'll be deposed as queen, etc. So what's interesting, when it comes to what the king does, it bad things happen, it happened. When it comes to the other person, though, there she is what she did. And that's very important for the Megillah, because the point of the Megillah in terms of Achashverosh is, in general, is a person who never wants to take responsibility for anything. Not for killing the Jews and not for saving the Jews, or rather killing the other guys. It's always you do whatever you want. And you do whatever you want should not be seen necessarily as a sense of he's a generous kind of fellow. It's more about you do what you want. And if it turns out poorly, then you did it and I didn't do it. The decree against the Jews, which later on he doesn't like because he suspects Haman. Who's the wicked person who did it? Oh, Haman did it. Haman Araz that, right? Who did it, Esther? Who is it? Not you, King. You're a wonderful guy. It's Haman. That's the Megillah. So, well, of course, the king. The only person who has power in the Megillah is Achashverosh. Haman is powerless. He's a bad guy. He has no power to do anything. So the point is, in any event, after these, so chapter 4 begins. Mordechai Yodad Kosher Nasa. Mordechai knew everything that was taking place. It says Vayubash Sakva. He puts on sackcloth. It says no. Vayikra Mordechai. He tore his clothing. Vayubash Sakva Efer. He puts on sackcloth. Vayitzei B'toch Ha'ir. Vayizak Zakar Gedolal Mara. He went out to the middle of the city, B'toch Ha'ir, and he cried out with a big bitter cry. That's the first verse. And the next verse is like Esav. And the next verse is Vayavo Ad Lefnei Shar HaMelech. He went up to the gate of the king. Kien Lovo Shar HaMelech Bilvusak. Because one may not enter the gate of the king if one is wearing sackcloth. So I want to say a few words about these verses, what I think they signify. First of all, why is Mordechai in the city? Mordechai's mourning, carrying your clothing, putting on sackcloth. These are the rituals of mourning. It would appear from the text that there are two reasons that Mordechai goes outside the gate. Mordechai's in the gate of the king. He leaves the gate. He goes b'toch ha'ir. He goes to the middle of the city, and it sounds like for two reasons. First reason seems to be that he wants to be in the city. In other words, because the next verse says that in every state, every city, wherever there are Jews, all the Jews are wearing sackcloth. All the Jews are mourning. Sak va'efer yutzal rabim. So Mordechai, you can read Mordechai's crying with a loud cry, and going to the middle of the city. One can read that since Mordechai is the prominent Jew of the Megillah, Mordechai Yehudi. You can see that as Mordechai being in the middle of the city, because he wants to be with the people. And maybe not just be with the people, but maybe Mordechai is even leading the people. Mordechai is telling the people, in effect, through the way he behaves, this is the time for crying, for mourning, for fasting. So one way to read it is that Mordechai, and I think it's a very shot, it could be, that he's going out to the city, he's the leading Jew, he goes out and he gives a big cry and he's wearing sackcloth. Then in the next verse, in every place where the king's edict has come, all the Jews, Evel Gadol, all the Jews are mourning. So, B'chiyum Spain, that's one reason he's in the middle of the city. But then the Megillah says something very strange. In the following verse, he went up to the gate of the king. Ad Shar HaMelech, Kien Lovo Shar HaMelech B'vusak. One may not enter the gate of the king wearing sackcloth. You can't be in the Shar HaMelech if you're wearing sackcloth. So therefore, it says he went up to the gate, but he doesn't go into the gate. So what is the significance of that verse? Why does the Megillah tell us they went up to the gate, but not into it, because one may not enter the gate of the king wearing sackcloth? So I wanted to say something about, in my Megillah that I wrote, if you saw it, it's in Hebrew, and not an easy Hebrew either. I didn't write it myself, but it's my stuff. Talk about this, among other things, many things. So the point is the following. When it says he went up to the gate, first of all, the verse is saying something about the palace of the king. Chapter 4, which is the critical chapter of the Megillah, because that's the chapter where Mordechai says to Esther, you have to go in and save the Jews, and at first she resists, and he says to her, maybe this is why you became the queen. Imli 8 Kazot. That's the name of my Megillah. Imli 8 Kazot. For such a time as this. It's being translated now, by the way. Maybe in who knows when it'll be published. But in any event, this is your moment. This is your responsibility. So that's the key chapter. So the point is that chapter 4, tells us two things about the rules of the palace. Rule number one is you can't enter the gate of the king wearing sackcloth. You can't be a mourner in the gate of the king. The palace of the king, there's no mourning inside the palace. That's the first rule. That's the way the chapter begins. And the second law connected to the palace is at the end of the chapter, where Esther says to Mordecai, who says to her, go and beg the king for your people. And Esther says, everybody knows that you can't walk into the king's inner chamber. If you walk into the inner chamber, you're killed, man or woman, except if the king gives you permission. And I haven't been called for 30 days. So actually, the beginning of the chapter and the end of the chapter, the two rules of the palace, are exactly the two rules that we discover in the story of Nadav and Avihu. The first rule, that you can't be a mourner inside the temple, is what Moshe says to Aaron, who's in the middle of the sacrificial service. He says, let the others mourn. Israel will mourn. You can't mourn. Inside the temple, there's no mourning. You don't mourn in the temple. And the second rule, connected to Nadav and Avihu, in chapter 16, God spoke to Moshe, Acharei mot shnei b'nei Aaron, after the death of Aaron's sons, right? The karvatam, they came too close, right? Can't go, and the Torah says, tell Aaron, right, not to go into the holy place, lest he die. However, Bezot Yavo Aaron up with this, he may enter. If he brings the appropriate sacrifices, I'll let him enter. So the truth of the matter is that the two rules of Achashverosh's palace, namely, there's no mourning, and number two, to enter the inner sanctum, you need special permission, are exactly the two rules we have in the Chumash about the Beis HaMikdash, about the Mishkan. So, which means something important for the Megillah. The Megillah wants us to understand that in the scroll of Esther, there is no Mikdash. The Mikdash is the house of Achashverosh. That's actually a very important point. And I would say now we know Mikdash in the book of Esther, unlike what many other people say, which I think is not based in this text, and unlike the book of Daniel and the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. There is no sense on any level in this book, the Megillah, that you're going to return to Israel and build a temple. There's absolutely no sense of that. In the Megillah, this is where we are. We're in exile. And that's what the book is actually about. How do you function in exile? Exile means not just not in the land. Exile means that the king is Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh, you never know what he's going to do. He can make Mordecai the second advisor, second in command, and he can make Haman the second in command. You never have a sense what this guy's going to do. Either because he's a fool, or he's not a fool at all. He's a very clever guy who actually, but a completely amoral person. He couldn't care less. It's all about himself. So that's the very important. That's the beginning and end. Sounds familiar, I know. Beginning and end of chapter 4. It's actually very striking. But I want to say something about this business of not entering the gate of the king wearing sackcloth. And that is that when it says he went up to the gate, but he can't enter the gate, because you can't enter the gate wearing sackcloth, when it says he went up to the gate, what I think it suggests to us is that if he could enter the gate, he would enter the gate. Right? That's what it means, right? He goes up to the gate. He's in the street, maybe telling everybody, public statement, protest to the right. The Jews are massing the Jews to protest. He goes up to the gate, he stops. Can't enter the gate. Were he able to enter the gate, he would enter the gate. Were he able to enter the gate, maybe he himself would go to the king and beg the king. That's what he thinks he's supposed to do, beg the king. Okay, so it's a bad idea, but that's what he thinks you got to do. But he can't enter the gate. Now the question is, why does he have to go to the gate?
Hence, it just told us twice to be Yoshev Bishar HaMelech.
Right.
When he discovers the plot. So like that was his regular. Now what does that mean, Bishar exactly, as opposed to No.
Ad Shah means not in the Shah. Bishar means in the Shah. That's what I want. That's what so what's the point? That's what I want to talk about. But that's what I want to talk about. That's exactly the point I want to make. That idea. Here's the point. The question that is raised when I did the work on the Megillah, I read a lot of stuff, Jewish and not Jewish. It's a guy named Bush who writes the word commentary. And the Christians are very good, by the way, on the language. That's what they care about, the language, and they say it's excellent. But they're Christians. What does that mean, they're Christians? Bush has a Christian approach to things. He's bothered by certain things that I'm not bothered by. I'm not bothered by killing Haman's army. Doesn't bother me in the least. I couldn't kill her, Now, it is true, and he doesn't understand this, that Esther doesn't want to kill the army. The killing of the 75,000, who were not innocent people that he killed, the Haman's army, but it doesn't matter. Esther has no desire to kill anybody. She says to Achashverosh, she begs him, Lashiva Tasfarim, to retract the order. She says to him, call off the war. It's an obvious point, but people don't seem to recognize that. He goes to the king, call off the war. He doesn't want to call off the war. We can't call off the war. Once you issue the decree, it's got to happen, but I'll support your side. I don't want to get into that now, what his thinking could be. If he's not a dope, it could be he's a dope, but if he's not a dope, he has a very good idea in mind. In any event, so I'm not bothered by that, about the killing Amalek. Doesn't bother me in the least. Bush is bothered by this. The question that he raises, everybody raises, is the same question. Why are the Jews they're almost killed in the Megillah? It came this close. The king sleeps that night, we're all dead. It's a very important point about Amalek. They always come very close. It's very frightening. So, question. What is the cause of that? Now, the Midrashim, the Gemaras, Rishonim, what is the reason that the Jews are almost totally annihilated, destroyed? The Midrashim try to find some reason which will somewhat justify it. What did the Jews do wrong? So the reasons are very interesting. The Jews were totally assimilated. They ate of the meal of Achashverosh. Mordechai didn't bow down. Maybe other Jews did bow down to Haman, idolatry. The reality of the Megillah is, as I talk about this, the Megillah gives no reason, actually. There is no reason. Zero reason. The reason is Haman's angry at one guy and wants to kill all the Jews. There's no sense in the Megillah of B'nei Chata'enu because the Jews have sinned. There is a sense of an assimilated Jewry, that's true. But there's no sense in the Megillah that you're going to be annihilated, exterminated because you've sinned. There's no sense whatsoever. Right. And Esav is Amalek. Right, exactly. But there's none that. So I talk about that a lot. Now here's the point. Point is, there is one reason that we know the Jews are going to be killed. Namely, Mordechai doesn't bow down to Haman. That we do know. Mordechai doesn't bow down to Haman, and because of that, Haman decides to kill all the Jews. He takes it to the king, and the king basically says, okay, do your thing, And they sit down to eat and drink at the end of chapter 3, Yashul Ishtot. Now the question that's raised by many is, Mordechai not bowing down to Haman, did he do the right thing or the wrong thing? That's the question. Did Mordechai do the right thing and not bowing down? Want to be a tzaddik, but you've endangered all of the Jews. Or, no, does the right thing. Can't bow down to Haman. So this is the question. Big, very important question. And now, so the question is, first of all, let's not bowing down to Haman. Is it forbidden to bow down to Haman altogether? Let's start with that question. And anybody who reads the Tanakh knows very well that throughout the Bible, people bow down all the time, including to bad people, including good people bowing down to bad. Abraham bows down to Bnei Chet. He bows down to Esav many times. Many times he bows down. The brothers, and by the way, and were it forbidden to bow down to another person, it wouldn't matter if the other person is a saint or a sinner. If bowing down to a human being means it's wrong because you only bow down to God, then bowing down to Jacob and Joseph and Moshe is also wrong. What's the difference? Same idolatry. Moses is a human being. No intimation he's God. So the point is, not that people bow down to Moshe, but the point is bowing down, if you think bowing down is forbidden because it's only bow down to God, then you couldn't bow down to anybody. But when you read the Bible, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. People bowing down all over the place. It's a sign of respect. So the first question is, if it's permissible to bow down, why does Mordechai not bow down? So you could make the argument, which I advance. No, I'll get to that argument before you get to Amalek. That is a good argument, but leaving Amalek out of it, you could say something else, which is the pshat of the Megillah. Why, in fact, why the king issues a command in the Megillah? Everybody has to bow down to Haman. Why? Well, what's the thinking here? So first of all, what I stated is actually inaccurate. The king never said everybody has to bow down to Haman. The king said something different. The king said, this is a mistake some people make, and it's a bad mistake. There's no such decree. If you read the Megillah, you'll see straight out what the king says is, everybody in the gate of the king has to bow down to Haman. And the reason for that is clear, because in the verses that precede the command, two people try to kill the king. At the end of chapter 2 of the Megillah, Bigtan and Teresh. Who are Bigtan and Teresh? Shomrei Hasaf. They're guardians of the threshold. In other words, they're the liminal, they're the gate, basically. That's where the gate is. The gate is. So the point is, what the king is, two of his so-called guardians, right, in the gate, try to kill him. So the king is very concerned about the people in the gate. So he wants to make sure that people in the gate, right, are not going to get him. So he issues a loyalty oath for people, a test of loyalty. If you're loyal to the king, you bow down to my puppet, which is Haman. It's not that the king cares about Haman one way or the other. And no one actually in the court believes it's about Haman. Because the people in the court say to Mordechai, why do you violate the command of the king? Don't say why you bow down to Haman. He chose Haman for whatever reason. But Haman is, so Mordechai doesn't bow down. And one way to understand it is, Mordechai says to himself, it's a beautiful thing to have a loyalty test to the king. How could anybody possibly think I'm disloyal, given the fact that I'm the guy that informed them about Bigtan and Teresh? Mordechai is the one who tells them about Bigtan and Teresh. And I would add to this a very important point, which is, you have to remember, Haman has no idea he's not bowing down. It's not that he walked over to Haman and said, by the way, that loyalty test is good for them, but I'm not interested. I don't have to show my loyalty. Of course I'm loyal, so forget, I'm not bowing down to you. That's not what Mordechai said. Haman has no idea. Zero. So what he does is, he avoids them probably. The gate's a big place. He walks away. It never is a situation. Haman doesn't realize it until the people tell him. They rat on him. Now, why did they rat on him? And this is a very interesting question in terms of the language. Haman, they keep to go. They say to Haman, Mordechai, why don't you bow down? He refused to listen. Then they went to Haman to see if Mordechai's words would stand. It's playing on the standing and bowing. For he had told them he's a Jew. Now that expression, is ambiguous in the Megillah. What does it mean he told them he was a Jew? Is that the reason that he doesn't bow down? Or is that the reason they told him? So you could read it. Why do they? What do they care? He doesn't bow down. So let it. No. Why is the Jew not bowing down? We have to bow down. And so the Jew doesn't bow down. So they could be not the reason he doesn't bow down, but the reason they informed on him, anti-Semites in the court. That's one possibility. It has nothing to do then with it permissible to bow down. It's not necessary for him. It's not that it's usher. He's potter. He doesn't have to. That's one way to read it. It's a fine way to read it. As a kid, I thought that's the pshat. However, the common understanding in the rabbinic tradition, and I believe that is actually a better pshat, is that he doesn't bow down because it's forbidden. Of course, the question is, why is it forbidden? It's not forbidden. It's permissible. So I have two things to say about that. The second is what Sarah said. I'll get to that. Haman's not anybody. Haman's Amalek. And Amalek you can't bow down to. Because you're bowing down to Amalek. Amalek is the anti-God. You can't bow down. Amalek is God's enemy. Respecting Amalek is disrespecting God. That's one possibility, which I like. The other possibility is that actually the language of the Megillah, it's not just the word to bow down. It's korim u'mishtachavim. And korim u'mishtachavim may have a different valence to it, a different sense. We have an olenu korim. Korim u'mishtachavim is more than just bowing down. It's more worship. It's worship. It's right. It's a worship of. It's a ritual of worship. It's ascribing to the person more than any person is. Because it's something beyond just being a human being. And that's where Mordechai draws his line. In any event, the other possibility is that it is because it's Amalek. Respecting someone, okay. You can't respect Amalek. Because you're respecting Amalek, you're disrespecting God. Now you have these two possibilities. They're both wonderful. They're both possible. First one, as a kid, I always thought was the pshat, that he was because it's a loyalty test. And it's not, but Haman never would find out if you don't tell him. So he doesn't. That's not for me. Good idea for them. You know what I mean? It's like the joke about the guy who goes to this, comes to shul or go to church, whatever. So what did the rabbi speak about today? Oh, he was talking about all this. He really told them off, he says, Right? So the point is, it's for them, it's a little different step. For me, what do I want to tell you? So the question of these two interpretations, which is more probable? I think the rabbinic interpretation actually is a better interpretation. And what's very interesting is that when you read the language of chapter 3, where he doesn't bow down, they spoke to him every day, he refused to listen. That language actually is almost word for word the language the Torah uses when it comes to Joseph and Mrs. Potiphar. She would speak to him every day, he refuses to listen. Now in that story, Joseph says why he can't bow down. He says why. Your husband trusts me, your husband has helped me. And if I do this, he says, V'chatati Elohim. It's a sin against God. I'm sorry. That's his red line. He's an ambitious guy, as is Mordechai. But they have their red lines. For Joseph, it's Mrs. Potiphar. And for Mordechai, it's Amalek. That's his red line. That's what he's not going to do. So the question is, did he do the right thing or the wrong thing? If you presume the second way, that it's Amalek, how could you say he did the wrong thing? You can't bow down to Amalek. Of course he did the right thing. Except for one little detail. He did the right thing. But we have to remember what I said before, which is obvious when you read the Megillah. Many don't see it, but it's obvious. Which is, the edict of bowing down to Haman is only for people in the gate. And the question in the Megillah is, why is Mordechai in the gate in the first place? Because when you first meet Mordechai in the Megillah, in chapter 2, it's one of those verses we read out loud, Ish Yehudi Ayah b'Shushana Bira, Ushmo Mordechai ben Yoyeh ben Shviki Ishibidi. There was a Jew in Shushan the Bira, in the fortress Shushan, whatever. There's Shushan the city and the Shushan Abira. But even Shushan Abira is not the gate of the king. It's the citadel of the king, it's the fortress of the king, but it's not the gate. In fact, Mordechai is not in the gate of the king. When did we first discover Mordechai in the gate of the king? At the end of chapter 2. Why is he in the gate of the king, presumably? What is the context of Mordechai being in the gate of the king? Well, beforehand, he goes to the courtyard, it says. But no, the point, maybe the verse that'll be before that. There's an earlier verse, one or two verses earlier. The king chooses Esther to be his queen. He makes a big party, Mishta Esther. Next verse. Mordechai is in the gate of the king immediately after we're told that Esther is the queen. Now we know earlier we cared about Esther, but the presumption, and then it says later on, 2 verses later, in those days Mordechai was in the gate, Bigtan and terrorists trying to kill the king. So one could conjecture that Mordechai being in the gate of the king, no one forces him to be in the gate of the king. But once Esther is the queen, then suddenly we find him in a position of prominence, he's in the gate of the king. In other words, if you read it, that essentially Mordechai, and we have to remember, he comes from royalty. His lineage is traced back to Kish. Whether the same Kish or not is irrelevant. The same word, the same name. This is a guy, very like similar to Yosef. He's not an unambitious person. Any 17-year-old who has a dream where the sun, the moon, and the stars bow down to me, we might call that a megalomaniac, okay? That's Joseph's dreams. Not just the brothers bow down. Everybody bows down. He's driven to power. Joseph is, you don't get there by accident. He's driven to power. He knows what power wants. He knows how to use power to get where he wants to go. Of course, power knows how to use Joseph where power wants to go. That's the problem. But the point is, so now my point is a simple point. Of course, he does the right thing in not bowing down to Haman. In doing the right thing, he always kills all of us. But the question is a different question. Why is he there in the first place? That's a very good question. Why is he there in the first place? Now, you have to remember, when the closer you are to the king, the more limitations you have. My favorite example is the story of Joseph and Mrs. Potiphar. Joseph avoids Mrs. Potiphar. He runs away from her, gets thrown in jail. He's lucky to survive. Does the right thing, obviously. Okay, he avoided Mrs. Potiphar. Then 2 chapters later, or it's 1 chapter later, actually. 2 chapters later. 2 chapters later, he's in jail, and Paro has dreams. No one can interpret the dream. And his butler says to him, there's this Jew boy, and a very good interpreter of dreams. They rush him out of jail. Joseph shaves. He comes to And Paro said, I heard that you could interpret dreams. God interprets dreams. Tell me your dreams. Tells him the dream. So Paro says to him, listen, you're so wise, why don't you become my second? Gives him a ring, gives him clothing, and a bracelet, gives him a new name, gives him a chariot, and then he gives him a wife. And the wife is the daughter of the priest of On, Cohen On. His name is Potiphera. The daughter is named Osnat, which means misfortune. As I say, not misfortune, but misfortune. And the point is, Joseph, who avoided Mrs. Potiphar, ends up with the daughter of Cohen On of Potiphera. What is that about? The same name, actually. The point, I think, is very simple. If you want to be part of Pharaoh's court, and that's just part of his court, by the way, he's the number 2 guy in Egypt. Rak hakisei egdal mi Mecca. You're the most important one. Just I'm bigger than you. But everybody else is beneath you. That comes with a big price, actually. And the price is you can't be Joseph anymore if you work for Paro. You're Tzafnas Paneach. Baal Tzafon is an Egyptian god. You're not Joe anymore. You're a Christopher, basically. And Chris, here's the deal with Chris. I got a real nice wife for you. We have a whole priestly family of own. You know what I mean? The top priest in Egypt. Real idolatry. That's I'm your shadchan. That's the family you're marrying into. Now Joseph could have said, that's the price you pay. If you choose to be in this business, that's the price you pay. There's no way around it. You drive with the chariot of Egypt. It's a symbol of Mitzrayim, is the chariot. You are Safnas Paneach with the chariot, and you're married to the priestly family, and you dress like an Egyptian. I dress you. Not the Ketonet Pasim, Revid Zahav. And you also speak Egyptian. You don't speak Hebrew. Because when the brothers come down there, there's an interpreter. He's not talking Hebrew. In every way that you measure Jewishness, Joseph is a non-Jew. You got 2 choices, Joe. You could marry Osnat or not. The jail cell waits for you, and you'll be there you'll rot there till the day you die. That's your choice. What do you choose to do? Joseph chooses to be Pharaoh's assistant. And by the way, in choosing to do that, he does a lot of good. He saves the whole world. The politicians can do an unbelievable amount of good, but there's a price that you pay. And my point is that when it says he went to Tochair, but he wants to go back, but cannot go back to the court. You can't go back to the court because you're a Jew, and no Jew can enter there, because every Jew is mourning, actually. So the only one who can save the Jews in the Megillah is someone who's not Jewish. Or a Jew who doesn't know that she's Jewish, which of course is Esther. Her first response is to say, Mordechai, you get dressed. Forget them. That's her first response. Let's not forget that. She sends clothing to dress Mordechai, not to help the Jews. And when Mordechai presses her, she says, what can I do? It's against the law. You can't just walk in. Dangerous. Presses again. Then amazing. Then she says, okay, I'll cast my lot with the Jews. Probably I'll die also, but it doesn't matter. But my point is, I give an analog to it, and I'll stop with this. The analog is the first sin of the Bible. The snake approaches the woman and says, I heard you can't eat any fruit. Oh, no. We can have all the fruit we want, except for the tree, which is Betoch Hagan. The tree in the middle of the garden, Betoch, that we can't eat because we're going to die. You're not going to die. God's just talking. She takes the fruit. She eats it. She gives him. He eats it. They realize they're naked and they hide. Where do they hide, actually? Betoch Eitz Hagan. The same. That's where they hide. What is the point of the Chumash? That they're hiding Betoch Eitz Hagan. Why did the Chumash say that? The sin was eating the tree Betoch Hagan, and when they go to hide, they hide Betoch Eitz Hagan. So I think there's a very important point over here. It's a point about repentance, actually. That in order to truly repent, you have to go back to the same place. Mordechai understands something. He did do the wrong thing. But at the end of the day, his being in that place, inside the gate, was the cause of almost very close to the annihilation of all the people. He has, in effect, caused the almost annihilation of the Jewish people. So in order to make it right, you have to go back to the same place. He wants to go, but the problem is he can't get to that place because it's a contradiction in terms. Because if you're a Jew, and that's who he is, he's Mordechai the Jew. No Jew can enter. Not Mordechai or any Jew. Because anybody, one might say, anybody who sees himself or herself as a Jew can't enter the gate. But the only way to save the Jews is to be inside the gate, to approach the king. You got to find a Jew who's not mourning, but all the Jews are mourning, every place, except for one Jew. One Jew who's not only not mourning, doesn't seem to know what it's about altogether, because she knows something different. Because the chapter begins, Mordechai knows everything that was done. Then he sends to Esther a message, go save the Jews. And what's Esther's response? Everybody knows, she says. You can't just walk into the gate. So the question is, what do they know? The chapter actually is framed by knowing. It begins with Mordechai knows everything. Then Esther says to Mordechai, everybody knows you can't do that. So the question is, what do you know? You know what I mean? No, Mordechai is, it's like me, basically. You click on the news. You know the first thing I click on? Times of Israel. What's with the Jews? Then you see the other news, you know what I mean? What's with the Jews? Okay, it's very provincial. I plead guilty. But that's who I am. That's Mordechai the Jew. He knows with the Jew. Esther doesn't know from nothing. Esther doesn't actually know what's happening. She sends a message. She has no idea. She knows something different. The protocols of the court. What are you talking about? Everybody knows you can't do that. Who's the everybody? That's the question. For Esther, the everybody is the servants of the king, the people of the state, right? Then Mordechai has to somehow change her thinking. So he sends this message at the end of chapter 4. And he says to her, listen, first of all, don't think you're going to necessarily survive and the Jews will die. Maybe the reverse will happen. Maybe you and me will die and they'll survive. I can't talk about that now, but leave that aside. Then he says, and who knows, he says, maybe this is why you became the queen. So let's conclude with the following thought. The chapter is about knowing, actually. Mordechai knows what's happening. Esther knows the rules of the court. At the end of the chapter, Mordechai says to Esther, you know something? Maybe this is the time. He says, who knows? What do we know? Maybe, he says, maybe perhaps, we're 8 kazot at this time, for this time, you became the queen. And the reader is reminded of chapter 1 of the Megillah, the king's court. Who was in the king's court in chapter 1? Among others, Yodei Ha'itim, those who know the times, which is very significant in the Megillah, because the point of the Megillah, the other culture in the Megillah is all about fate. And the Megillah, by the way, doesn't simply dismiss fate as a reality. There's something to it, actually. It's what the people in so-called friends of Haman tell him when he comes home. If you start to fall, you're going to fall. You can't prevent it. It's like the law. If it's written, it's got to happen. You can't change it. That's the thinking in the Megillah, of the other culture in the Megillah, which the Megillah does not completely dismiss. This deterministic way of seeing things, there's something to it. But the Jew has a different path, and the Jew's path is Ubiyodea. It is possible. It's possible that you. It's what Rav Nachman said. Actually, I know the exact words. The highest level of knowing, he says, is to know you don't know. It's a tikkun, one might say, of the 8 sadas. The highest level, when you know what's what you really know, that you don't know. That's the real knowledge. What do we know in this world? But so Mordechai's message is to Esther, you know something? This is the right path. This is the path of faith, which means not that I know it's going to be okay. And my wife's desk is a little son, Clarence Jordan, who was a very devout Christian, interesting guy. Talks about faith. Faith is not believing things will turn out okay. It's not yet tov, expression that I detest, by the way. It's something different. It's doing the right thing despite the consequences. That's what he said. I completely accept that. That's what he says to Esther. This is the right thing to do. What do we know in this world, really? So Esther says, okay, I accept it. I'm going to do it. Kasher avadati avadati. If I perish, I perish. It's very strong. It's not if I perish, I perish. Kasher avadati almost says when I perish. I'm going to do it, knowing that very likely it won't succeed. But it's the right course to take. This is the conversation they have. This is a great moment in the Megillah in Muyet Kozot. So that knowledge actually is interesting in chapter 4, how it plays with the idea of knowledge. He knows, she knows. At the end of the day, what do we know? He says, Umiyodea, who knows? You do the right thing. Maybe that is the highest level of knowledge. Understand our limitations, which are so many and so great. So that's really the great moment in the Megillah. And if it's possible, then it's what Rosenzweig said. If it's possible, it's necessary. It's possible. It's possible. That's the course we have to take. I could say more about it, but stop at this point. Okay.